Reggie Jackson names 5 players he will never forgive. 5 men. 5 wounds that never healed. This is not about baseball rivalries or locker room drama. This is about racism, betrayal, and the price one man paid to become a legend. Reggie Jackson, Mr. October himself, carried a list in his heart for decades. A list of men who tried to break him. Men who used slurs, silence, and psychological warfare to remind him that no matter how many home runs he hit, he would never truly belong. And when he finally spoke their names, the sports world had to reckon with a truth it had spent years trying to bury. These 5 men shaped Jackson's career in ways no trophy ever could. They forced him to build armor out of arrogance, to turn insults into identity, and to survive in a system that valued his talent but despised his presence. This is the story of George Steinbrenner, Billy Martin, Thurman Munson, Graig Nettles, and Billy North. 5 names, 5 scars, and 1 man who refused to forget. George Steinbrenner was not just Reggie Jackson's boss. He was the architect of his misery. When Steinbrenner signed Jackson to the Yankees in 1977, he made him the highest-paid player in baseball. On paper, this looked like respect. In practice, it was something far darker. Steinbrenner operated with what Jackson later called a plantation mentality. He believed that buying Jackson's contract meant owning Jackson himself. Not just his swing, not just his time, but his dignity, his voice, his very sense of self. Steinbrenner thrived on chaos. He pitted Jackson against his manager, Billy Martin, and his teammates, knowing full well that racial tensions would erupt. He watched the Bronx Zoo burn and sold tickets to the fire. For Steinbrenner, conflict was not a problem to solve. It was a strategy, and Jackson was the kindling. The owner understood that controversy sold newspapers, filled seats, and kept the Yankees in the headlines. But he never considered the human cost of his manufactured drama. But the betrayal went deeper than manipulation. There was a moment when teenagers in a parking lot hurled racial slurs at Jackson. They screamed obscenities about his mother. They used language designed to provoke, to dehumanize, to reduce a grown man to a reaction. And when Jackson chased them down, the press framed him as the aggressor. The legal system treated him like a criminal. And Steinbrenner? Steinbrenner said nothing. He did not defend his star. He did not crusade for his dignity the way he might have for a white player like Thurman Munson. He let Jackson twist in the wind because, to Steinbrenner, Jackson was not a man. He was a commodity. And commodities do not require protection. They require performance. This silence spoke volumes about how Steinbrenner truly viewed his highest-paid employee. Protection was conditional, reserved only for those who fit a certain mold. Jackson has recalled moments when Steinbrenner's true beliefs slipped through the corporate veneer. Comments like, "All black people can do for me is shine my shoes and buy my records." Words that revealed a man who saw black excellence as entertainment, not equality. Steinbrenner made Jackson wealthy, but he also made him a prisoner of a contract that felt like chains, a prisoner of a system that rewarded his labor while resenting his agency. And that is why Jackson will never forgive him, because Steinbrenner proved that even when you are the best, even when you are the richest, even when you are the most famous, racism does not care. It just finds new ways to remind you that you are still not free. Steinbrenner wanted Jackson's brilliance on the field, but resented everything that made him brilliant off it. The owner treated Jackson like a piece in a chess game, moving him around to serve his own ego and ambitions. Now let's talk about Billy Martin. If Steinbrenner was the cold, calculating architect of Jackson's suffering, Billy Martin was the flame. He was rage personified, and he directed every ounce of that rage at Reggie Jackson. The core of Jackson's hatred for Martin is simple. Martin called him boy, not once, not accidentally, but repeatedly, deliberately. In the 1970s, in the shadow of the civil rights movement, that word carried the weight of centuries. It was the language of Jim Crow, the language used by white authority figures to strip black men of their manhood, their age, their accomplishments. Jackson's father had taught him a lesson he never forgot. You do not call a grown man boy. And yet here was Billy Martin, his manager, using that word like a weapon. For Jackson, it was not a slip of the tongue. It was a declaration of war. It was Martin saying, no matter how many World Series MVPs you win, you remain beneath me. Martin wielded that word with precision, knowing exactly how much pain it would inflict. The tension between the two men exploded at Fenway Park in 1977. Martin pulled Jackson from the game in the middle of an inning for an alleged lack of hustle on a fly ball. This was not normal. Superstars are not publicly humiliated like that, but Martin did it anyway, and when Jackson returned to the dugout, Martin lunged at him, screaming, veins bulging. Coaches had to restrain him. The whole scene was captured on national television. To the viewing public, it looked like chaos. To Jackson, it was an attempted lynching of character. Martin was trying to break him in front of the world. He was trying to physically subdue the uppity star who dared to demand respect. And Jackson knew that if he fought back, If he struck his white manager on live TV, his career would be over. So he stood there, silent, seething, surviving. The cameras captured Martin's rage but missed the calculated restraint Jackson showed. That restraint was its own form of strength, a refusal to give Martin the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. But Martin's bigotry was not limited to Jackson's race. He also made anti-Semitic remarks. Jackson, who has claimed Jewish roots or affinity, saw Martin's hatred as comprehensive. It was not just anti-black. It was anti-anything that was not white, compliant, and traditional. Martin believed in an all-American boy ideal, and when Jackson asked people to Google that phrase to search for black faces, he found none. Martin resented Jackson because Jackson represented the intrusion of blackness into the sacred imagery of the Yankee dynasty. DiMaggio, Mantle, Ruth. These were Martin's heroes, and Jackson in Martin's eyes was a stain on that legacy. That is the unforgivable part. Martin did not just insult Jackson, he tried to erase him, and Jackson refuses to let that erasure stand. Next is Thurman Munson, the captain, the heart and soul of the Yankees, the beloved blue-collar catcher who played through pain and led by example. Munson was supposed to be Jackson's teammate. Instead, he became his tormentor. The feud is famously tied to a quote Jackson gave to a magazine. "I'm the straw that stirs the drink. Maybe I should say me and Munson, but he can only stir it bad." Jackson claimed he was misquoted, but the damage was done. Munson felt betrayed, and the team turned on Jackson. But here's what most people miss. The root of the conflict was not pride, it was money. Munson had actually encouraged Steinbrenner to sign Jackson, hoping Jackson's high salary would raise the bar for everyone and allow Munson to demand a raise. But when Jackson got the money and the fame, and Munson was left to fight for scraps, Munson's anger was misdirected. He blamed Jackson instead of Steinbrenner. Munson saw Jackson as the problem when the real issue was an owner who refused to pay him what he deserved, and that anger became racialized. Munson represented the hard-working white player who got his uniform dirty. Jackson represented the flashy black star who drove a Rolls-Royce and did TV commercials. In the locker room, this translated into economic jealousy wrapped in racial resentment. Munson, as captain, set the tone. He refused to speak to Jackson. He gave the rest of the team permission to treat Jackson like a pariah. The silent treatment became a form of violence, and Jackson felt it every single day. The nickname Mr. October, the name that became Jackson's badge of honor, was actually coined by Munson, contemptuously, sarcastically. Munson meant it as a slur. He was mocking Jackson for caring about the big stage, for being arrogant, for being visible. Jackson, in a stroke of genius, reclaimed the insult and turned it into legend, but its origin was rooted in hostility. Now think about what message that sends. You walk into work every day. Your captain, the leader, refuses to acknowledge you. Your teammates follow his lead. The silence is suffocating. You are isolated, you are othered, and all because you dared to be great and get paid for it. Jackson wanted to be a Yankee. He wanted to be part of the brotherhood. Munson slammed the door in his face, and even after Munson's tragic death in a plane crash in 1979, even after narratives of reconciliation emerged, Jackson still carries the wound. Because Munson had the power to stop the hazing. He had the power to protect Jackson. Instead, he led the charge. And that is a betrayal Jackson will never forgive. The captain's silence gave everyone else permission to treat Jackson as an outsider in his own clubhouse. Then there is Graig Nettles, the all-star third baseman, the clubhouse jester, the man who used humor as a knife. If Martin was the angry father and Munson was the resentful brother, Nettles was the mocking cousin. He undermined Jackson through ridicule, and his racism was not loud or violent. It was casual, comfortable, insidious, the kind of racism that hides behind a smile and says, "I was just joking." But Jackson was not laughing. The most damning evidence against Nettles comes from a book written by teammate Sparky Lyle. In it, Lyle describes a moment when Nettles watched an opposing player, Wayne Cage, taking batting practice. Cage was a large black man. Nettles turned to a teammate and said, "I never saw a player with his address on his uniform." Let that sink in. That comment invokes the projects, poverty, the ghetto. It reduces a professional athlete to a racial caricature of a criminal or a welfare recipient. And Nettles said it in the sanctity of the clubhouse, a space shared by black players. It was not a joke. It was a message that no matter how talented you are, no matter how successful, white teammates like Nettles will always see you as less than. Jackson understood this. He understood that Nettles viewed black people through a lens of inherent inferiority. Nettles also made comments designed to delegitimize Jackson's ability. He joked that Babe Ruth would not be able to bat cleanup today because he did not strike out enough. On the surface, it is about strikeouts. Below the surface, it is part of a campaign to portray Jackson's power as lucky and his strikeouts as evidence of a lack of discipline, a common racial trope. Nettles was also a key enforcer of the silent treatment. He ignored Jackson on the field. He refused to engage in camaraderie. For Jackson, Nettles represented the polite racism of the North, the racism that smiles to your face while ensuring you never feel welcome. And that is why Jackson will never forgive him, because Nettles tried to hide his bigotry behind humor. And Jackson refuses to accept the premise that those were just jokes. They were weapons, and they cut deep. Every laugh at his expense was a reminder that he would never be one of them, no matter how many games he won for the Yankees. Finally, there is Billy North, the Oakland A's speedster, the only black man on Jackson's unforgiven list. And that makes this story the most painful of all. North and Jackson were teammates during the A's dynasty years. They should have been brothers, allies in a league that was overwhelmingly white and often hostile. But instead, they became enemies. In 1974, the two men got into a brutal clubhouse brawl. The fight was so violent that catcher Ray Fosse, trying to separate them, suffered a crushed disc in his neck, an injury that derailed his career. Jackson reportedly felt immense guilt over that, but the damage between him and North was done. What caused two black teammates to come to blows? The answer lies in lateral violence. The A's clubhouse was divided into cliques, often along racial lines, and Jackson refused to be confined to the black clique. He wanted to be a universal superstar. He wanted to court the favor of the white media and ownership. To some of his black teammates, this looked like betrayal. It looked like Jackson was trying too hard to be liked by everybody. In the charged atmosphere of the 1970s, that was a coded accusation. Billy North, a younger player fighting for his own recognition, resented Jackson's ego and his ability to transcend racial boundaries, and he viewed that transcendence as abandonment. North believed Jackson was choosing white acceptance over black solidarity, a choice that felt like a knife in the back. For Jackson, this was the deepest cut of all. In a league where he faced boy slurs from managers and plantation treatment from owners, the black teammate should have been a sanctuary, a safe harbor, but North became a physical enemy, and that represented a loss Jackson still mourns. The racism angle here is not that North was racist, it is that the environment of racism created a scarcity of dignity. It forced black players to fight each other for the scraps of respect left on the table. Jackson's inability to forgive North speaks to the heartbreak of this fracture. It was a reminder that the pressure of being a black star in a white league was so intense that it turned brother against brother, and Jackson refuses to let that pain be forgotten. So why does Reggie Jackson never forgive? Because to forgive would be to forget. And Jackson's memory is a survival mechanism. The unforgiven list is not an act of vengeance, it is an act of witnessing. Jackson is testifying to the reality of his experience. He is refusing to let the glory days nostalgia wash away the ugly truth of how he was treated. He is asserting that his home runs did not purchase his acceptance. They only purchased his tolerance. The Reggie persona, the arrogance, the third-person references, the swagger, was a suit of armor. He had to be arrogant to counter Steinbrenner's control. He had to be aggressive to counter Martin's abuse. He had to be loud to counter Munson's silence. He had to be serious to counter Nettles' jokes. He had to be singular to counter North's cliques. These five men are inextricably linked to Jackson. They are the antagonists in his hero's journey. But the racism angle reveals they were not just villains. They were enforcers of a social order that was crumbling. Jackson defeated them all. He outlasted Steinbrenner's threats. He outlived Martin and Munson. He outshined Nettles and North. But the victory came with a cost, a permanent sense of isolation, a ledger of scars that time could not heal. And yet Jackson survived. He rose above the plantation mentality. He reclaimed the boy slur by becoming Mr. October. He turned the straw that stirs the drink into a declaration of greatness. He survived the address joke and the Uncle Tom accusation. He built a legacy that no amount of hatred could erase. His 3 home runs in Game 6 of the 1977 World Series were not just athletic achievement. They were an answer to everyone who tried to diminish him. Today, Reggie Jackson is not defined by these 5 men, but he refuses to let the world forget them either, because their names are a map of the racism that existed in 1970s baseball, a map of the psychological warfare waged against black excellence, a map of the price one man paid to become a legend. And Jackson wants us to remember that while fans cheered for his home runs, many in the stadium and in his own dugout were rooting against his humanity. That is the unforgiven list. 5 names, 5 wounds, and 1 man who turned pain into power. Reggie Jackson will never forgive, and maybe he should not have to, because some things are unforgivable, and remembering them is the only way to ensure they never happen again. His refusal to forget is not bitterness. It is truth-telling. It is making sure history remembers not just the home runs, but the cost of hitting them. What do you think? Should Jackson have forgiven them? Or is his refusal to forget the only way to honor the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story opened your eyes to a side of baseball history you never knew, hit that subscribe button, because there are more untold stories waiting to be heard. Thanks for watching.